This podcast is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Go to CDkeyoffer.com during their Black Friday sale to save 25% on all Microsoft software with offer code BrokenSilicon. Then also use Broken Silicon to save $30 on the Minis Forum 7600 MXTE GPU dock. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today is going to be another one of those episodes we do occasionally that isn't as gaming focused, but I think honestly, this guest is a fan favorite, actually, of the hardcore supporters of Moore's Law is Dead, because it's one thing to argue about how much RAM a graphics card should have for the price. It's another thing to understand why that RAM might cost what it does and why it might be hard to get a hold of the components we actually need. And this is the fifth time this guest has been on. Founder of SemiWiki.com, wrote the book on fabs called Fabless, 40 years of experience in the semiconductor industry. So truly a veteran that can really give us some insight into what's going on with these companies that make the products we like to talk about. And certainly there have been some developments with some of these major companies over the past, not just year, but just over the past week. So please, Daniel Nenni, thank you for coming on again. Tell people, who maybe didn't see you the other 4 times you were on, how would you describe who you are and what you do professionally?
I'm just a semiconductor professional. Been here for about 40 years. Currently, I do mergers and acquisitions. So I'm still involved in the semiconductor ecosystem. It's a daily thing. I go to all the conferences. I was at a couple of conferences this week. I was at the conference where they awarded Hock Tan the Morris Chang Excellence Award. And there's, CEOs all over the place. So there's a lot of hallway talk. And that's open game, non-NDA stuff. Mm-hmm. And next week is IEDM. So it's a big conference for us. So that's what I do. I do mergers and acquisitions. I do business development for startup companies. And I am a professional conference attendee. I started SemiWiki about 14 years ago to give semiconductor professionals a voice. Semiconductors are a pretty difficult thing, and the professionals are the ones that should be talking about it. And so there's about 250,000 people registered on SemiWiki. We have thousands of conversations. In fact, there's some really interesting conversations now. I learn a lot from these people because there are so many exciting things going on. We're going to have to talk about Intel at some point in time, right?
Yes, that certainly. What timing? I actually, let's just start talking about the Intel stuff right now here. Let's see, which question do I want to start with? Let's start with this before we get to Pat. Insanity Rain writes in and says, "Hello, Tom and Daniel. Hope you are both doing well. My question is, in your opinion, which mistake is the one that hurt Intel the most? There's been many, but they've had kind of a failure of ARC, production issues, and reliability issues plaguing Raptor Lake 13th and 14th gen, cancellation of the Royal Core project behind the scenes, cost of foundries, and its impact on competitive pricing. All of these have had a role to play, but which one do you think hurt the company most? Or maybe it's something else."
I grew up with Intel. I'm born and raised in Northern California, and when I got out of college, I had an offer from Intel, and I almost took it, but I chose companies that were the underdogs because at that time, Intel was the king, right? Nobody competed with Intel. The Intel, Microsoft, or Wintel thing, that was an amazing era. But, things change, and Intel kind of lost focus. And if you really want to look at their problem, you have to look at about 20 years ago. They've had 3 or 4 very bad CEOs in a row. And, you can blame the CEOs, but it's really the board of directors, right? They're the ones that hired and fired the CEO. And so, the last 2 CEOs, Bob Swan, outsourced his chip design because the Intel manufacturing wasn't doing well. This is the 10 nanometer, which is now 7 nanometer fiasco. And, he really saved the company because they were able to put their chips over to TSMC, which is the undisputed leader for semiconductor manufacturing right now. But, the board of directors really didn't want that. They wanted Intel to be back the old Intel dominating manufacturing, and so they hired Pat Gelsinger. And Pat Gelsinger did what he said he was going to do, but the market didn't react properly. The chips that they produce, they're not bad. I see them in the field. I don't know the specific names, but they're competitive with AMD. But AMD is a lot more competitive than maybe people thought. And certainly Pat Gelsinger, he said he was AMD was in their rearview mirror, which was a very unfortunate thing to say. But there's also other competition with the hyperscalers. So I was on a project with Google and Amazon and Microsoft. They're building their own chips, and they're really good chips, and they're hiring the best from Silicon Valley, right? If you look at the payroll of all these companies, these people are from AMD, from Intel. We swap employees pretty rapidly out here. But the thing is that the economics are against Intel. They missed a few windows. They had much more competition, and the CEO swap that they're doing now is just insane. So if you want to blame anybody, blame the board of directors. But, the bottom line is Intel was so dominant for so many years that brings a culture to your company that maybe is not right for a more competitive environment. I think that's the bottom line.
That's, I guess if I had to pick one thing, I couldn't just pick, oh, well, their graphics didn't turn out, or Meteor Lake didn't hit its performance goals, and then also they were behind on this node. It's like these are all very different failures. And if they're similar types of failures, but with all different types of products and initiatives, it's not any one product, right? It's the culture. There's something that just seems to have rotted in middle and upper management from what I gather. And it is interesting you say that about the board too as well, because it's like, well, you can blame a CEO, but who chose the CEO, right? And like, who keeps choosing who is in charge of what divisions? It's those people ultimately that have been doing that for a long time. Now, I don't know any of them individually, but I mean, I guess where do you think that goes from here with those people then? Like, do you think we need a clean house with upper management, or is that going to eventually happen because they'll get to a point where someone buys some part of Intel or buys a share and wipes them out? Or like, where do you think that's going?
It's a good question. There's actually a huge discussion with 30,000 people on SemiWiki about this same thing. The board of directors and the CEOs they've had. And, the question is, what are they going to do next? And, I think somebody posted, if you were Intel CEO, what are you going to do? And, I've given it some thought. I really do think they need a strong leader. And Pat Gelsinger was a strong leader, but he was a cheerleader, right? Not just a leader, but a cheerleader. And I married a cheerleader. I know cheerleaders. They're just overly optimistic. And Pat Gelsinger was just overly optimistic. And he set the sights, he set the goals and the expectations much too high. For example, having the best process. Again, it just doesn't work that way anymore, because you have a process, but you also have a customer that designs to that process. And if your process has all these big numbers and papers and PowerPoint slides, but the customer gets the PDK, the design kit, and simulates to their design, and they don't see those numbers, then that's a bad thing, right? And so it's better not to be overly optimistic, because then you'll miss your customer goals, and your customers aren't going to care for that. They won't trust you. TSMC is very risk adverse. They are very, confident in their numbers of their PDKs because they work with so many customers. So when a customer downloads a PDK for TSMC, they know what they're going to get. With Intel and Samsung, for example, they just don't know. So, it was just setting expectations. So how do you do that? You're going to have to reset expectations. That's going to hurt. The Wall Street folks are really going to be upset about it. TSMC is bleeding money. And, they say they got CHIPS Act money, but it really is not that much money, right? It cost $40 billion to build a leading edge fab, and they got $8 billion, right? So in my opinion, Intel needs to stay the same. You can't break out manufacturing. Everybody says, oh, spin out the foundry. Well, you can't, because the foundry will never be profitable, not for a long time. The foundry business is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
You think just because Intel built up their foundries in such a different way that like getting to a level of profitability that TSMC has is like, it would take way too long. Is kind of what you're saying, or?
Yeah, well, Samsung's been trying it for 20 years and they haven't made it, right? And they
I
put,
got a few questions about that too.
tens of billions of dollars into it. So it's not an easy thing. They're different kind of foundries, right? TSMC is a pure play foundry. They don't do design. So they have to rely on their customers for design information to build their processes. So they build their processes to the customer's specifications. And they have a handful of trusted few customers, Apple, AMD, Nvidia, Qualcomm, Amazon, where they only work with TSMC. So they share a lot of information. With an IDM foundry, they have their own designs. They build the processes based on their own design groups. And that's great because you can get really good chips. Intel put out some excellent chips, better than AMD, better than anybody, because they had, their own manufacturing facility. But, Intel got a little sloppy and 14 nanometer got a little bit late and 10 nanometer was horribly late. And then TSMC was just, leveraging all these partners and customers, gathering all this money, trillions of dollars, building this ecosystem. And they just passed them by. So, an IDM foundry, there are advantages. Pure play foundry, there are advantages. But, being an open foundry for hundreds of customers, that's really a pure play foundry. That's where they do the best.
Carbon Cry writes in and asks, can we stop the pretense and call Samsung what they are at this point, a trailing edge foundry? And how expensive and dire is Samsung's halting of operations in its many fabs?
Yeah, Intel came out with IDM 2.0, and TSMC came out with Foundry 2.0. They were just kind of making fun of Intel. They're competitors, but they're friends. It's kind of a funny situation. But I tagged Samsung as I don't know 2.0, and because I went to their event and it was just not good. I just really don't think they know what they're doing. And they change management every year. They just had a huge management change. But if you say Samsung, I don't know 2.0, you're going to get a letter from their lawyers. So I wouldn't say it too much. But they really are unorganized, and they really focused on the not TSMC business, right? People who want an alternative to TSMC. Because here's what happens when you go to negotiate a wafer price with any company. You say, give me a better price or I'll go elsewhere. Well, there's no elsewhere to go, right? And even if you make that threat, it's not good unless you go elsewhere, right? You have to have some weight behind it.
Nvidia actually did with Samsung and 8 nanometer. They actually did. They proved they would do it once,
They've done it more than once. Qualcomm's done it. A lot of people have done it. The not TSMC market, I think at the height was maybe $10 billion because of that reason. And also, it's not just that. It's everybody wants an alternative, right? Just in case. You never know what's going to happen. So that's the market. And if Intel would have come out and said, hey, you know what? We're going to own the not TSMC market, they would have been highly successful, right? But they went out and said, hey, we're going to beat TSMC, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, I guess going back to Pat Gelsinger, that's what Pat did over and over. We're not going to make graphics cards for the low end. We're going to beat Nvidia. Or, we're not going to, we're going to beat everybody at once, even though we're kind of out of money right now. I mean, I guess you could say the same of the foundries. Carbon Cry writes in again and asks, are we now in a semiconductor oversupply scenario? Will the market seem well supplied outside of insatiable AI, of course? Basically, all client and smartphone silicon and almost all server silicon is made at TSMC. Meanwhile, Samsung closed fabs and Intel's reeling from fab underutilization. This shows, I think, that installed wafer production capacity is significantly larger than organic demand for wafers. And I'm sure some nodes are far higher demand than others, of course, but it does. Would you say maybe some of these nodes, they built too many of them, or should I say they built too much capacity?
Yeah, and people blame it on the pandemic, but really that's not it. It's really based on ego, per se, of different countries and different regions. Everybody wants manufacturing in-house now, and it's something, in their region. And it's something that, politicians can really grab onto, like, hey, I want manufacturing. And the U.S. politicians are like, hey, Taiwan and China stole our manufacturing. But honestly, what really happened, and I was here when it happened, there were fabs in Silicon Valley. My first job was at a fab, not too far from the heart of Silicon Valley, and the government, the Environmental Protected Agency, made it horrible for fabs, and the fabs were not good neighbors. That they poisoned groundwater. There were so many lawsuits around here. My wife and I moved 60 miles away when we decided to have children because of the groundwater issues. So that's why semiconductor manufacturing left Silicon Valley anyway, because it just wasn't ecologically sound. And that's just the way it was. I spent a lot of my time in Hsinchu in Taiwan. I spent probably half my career there. I was, China, oh my gosh, China 20 years ago, the manufacturing there was so dirty. And Hsinchu was, you could just taste the air. It was just horrible. There were a dozen fabs, within 5-mile radius or 10-mile radius. But it's different now. The fabs are fairly green. And, I was at a conference this week. They're cleaning up the water. The water going out of a fab now is cleaner than when it came in. The challenge you have is it uses up a lot of water. And so, not all the water that goes into a fab comes out of a fab. So, so now we want manufacturing back, and it's cleaner. We can get it back. But nobody stole it from us, right? We just didn't know how to do it back then where it was feasible for the environment. But here's the thing is everybody wants fabs now. It's an easy thing to say because of the shortages. And, let's be clear, the shortages were man-made. When the pandemic hit, these customers cut their orders.
Yeah.
And C.C. Wei, the CEO of TSMC, he gave away the Morris Chang Award last night. And it was funny because he still makes jokes about it that, people canceled their orders and 6 months later they called and said, hey, we need those back. And, if you understand how manufacturing of semiconductors work, when you canceled an order, that's it. It takes you 9 months to a year to restart that whole process. And that's what it's a gap. It wasn't a shortage. It's a gap. So, but we took the shortage to heart and we started building fabs and optimizing our current fabs. And China bought all the fab equipment. They bought half the fab equipment for the last 3 years. Every year they're just buying equipment that's just sitting in boxes. It's not even online yet. But, if you look at
the insurance too, right? I hear they're stockpiling SSDs and a lot of other stuff in case something happens where they can't get it anymore.
Yeah, it's their own parts department, right? So anytime a fab closes in the U.S. or anywhere, China buys everything, right, through brokers and because it's spare parts, right? But, the bottom line is that everybody wants to build fabs. Governments are putting lots of money into it. It's a very political, thing. The CHIPS Act is pretty impressive. They hired a lot of several of my friends are involved in the CHIPS Act, and they've been on my podcast. In fact, just last week, and it's amazing. We have done some great things. The CHIPS Act actually is a pretty cool piece of legislation, and other countries are doing the same. Unfortunately, we're just overbuilding. And so, here's an example. TSMC built a fab in Japan recently, and it's a 28 nanometer fab. At no time are we, under capacity for 28 nanometer. That was one of the biggest no's. We have a huge amount of fabs. But when TSMC built the fab, they have partners. So it's a joint development agreement. They're just not building fabs like Intel, where build fabs, they will come. But TSMC doesn't do that. TSMC builds fabs based on customer orders. Customers are prepaying now. Intel did a huge prepay. Nvidia prepays. So TSMC is building fabs that are already paid for, per se. So TSMC built a fab in Japan, or is building fabs in Japan, and they're going to build fabs in Dresden, but they're joint ventures with big customers. So these fabs are already going to have customers built in, right? And so what's going to happen? We're going to build 4 more 28 nanometer fabs for automotive and all sorts of stuff. Well, what happens to UMC and Global Foundries and SMIC, whose life bread is 28 nanometer, right? Because they really don't have FinFETs, at least UMC and Global. They have up to 14 nanometer, but they don't have anything smaller. So TSMC is out there building with partners, and they're just going to mow over the other fabs, right?
I think that's something me and you discussed one of the times. This had to have been years ago when Global Foundries announced that they weren't going to 7 nanometer. And I remember we talked about this, and I think I suggested, like, I get that it makes sense short term, but if they don't go, eventually won't TSMC just have all of the capacity anyways, even at what Global Foundries is good at? And long term, wouldn't that just mean the pie keeps shrinking unless you get to a cutting edge node? I mean, is that what you think is going to happen then to a lot of these other companies?
Absolutely. I mean, what else? There's nothing else that can happen. TSMC runs at 50% margins while UMC and Global, are at 20%. So TSMC could cut their margins and put them out of business. The thing that TSMC is most worried about is being a monopoly, right? So, they're going to be careful. But when you build a fab with a partner who is a customer, it's a different story, right? Because TSMC owns half the fab, the customers own the other half, and it's guaranteed volume. So they're not out there dumping chips, or dumping wafers, right? So these are strategic partnerships. And the partners, if you look at Dresden, I mean, the partners are Infineon, are in Bosch. I mean, these are the top European semiconductor companies. And you have to ask yourself, why didn't they partner with Global Foundries? Because TSMC does it better, right?
Yeah.
And they're doing it cheaper. Their margins are the best. And, who are you going to partner with? You're going to partner with the best. So, if automotive companies don't have the best chips, they won't get the best, best prices on their cars. So it's just a very strategic move from TSMC. The issue I have is that all these fabs stopped at a certain technology, right? Global didn't develop their 14 nanometer. They licensed that from Samsung, right?
Yeah.
Global didn't really develop any processes. They bought them from other companies. So you have to wonder what the future of Global Foundries is, because at some point in time, people are going to move on, and that cow they're milking is going to die. And the same thing with UMC. UMC doesn't have FinFETs. They're still milking the CMOS cow. And SMIC is lucky because they have the Chinese government, right? So they have a fixed customer, but they really don't have good yield on their FinFETs. But this brings me back to a thought about Intel is Intel is good at manufacturing, right? Okay, so they slipped at 10 nanometer. I got it.
Certainly compared to Samsung, right? They're good. I mean, come on.
Well, what happened is EUV wasn't ready. And, Intel said, hey, I'll do it without EUV, but they were delayed. And by the time they got everything going, EUV was there, right? So TSMC and Samsung did EUV at 7 nanometer, and Intel didn't. So it was just, they made a bet and they lost. It happens in this world. But let me tell you, they're 3 nanometer and they're 4 nanometer and 18A, they're actually good processes. But the problem is they're late, right? But they're good processes. They're sound processes. They're yielding. They're really good at performance, maybe not at power, but they really are good products. And, unfortunately, they're just not as good as TSMC. And, Bob Swan came into Intel and said, hey, design guys, you can use TSMC or Intel. Make your choice. And they all chose TSMC, right? Because it's a better process and they know it works, So now Gelsinger comes back in and said, hey, you guys, you own stock. Our stock's never going to go anywhere unless you use our processes, right? So now all Intel groups are mostly moving back to Intel. But, 18A, Bob was too optimistic. It came out too early. The PDK wasn't good. But it's back. PDK 1.1 is out. I know several people who have it. It's a good process. But here's the thing, and you have to, think about this yourself. If it's your company, who would you bet your product on?
Right.
Intel or TSMC, right? Intel could explode at any moment. And, firing Pat Gelsinger was just the worst thing, right? They call it retirement. I call it refirement because, they said he retired, but I mean, we all know he got fired,
come
right?
on. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and as just like the last CEO, BK, I don't know, do you remember BK? I think we were talking at that time, but he was fired for a relationship he had 10 years before he was.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they just wanted him gone. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing: is he was not a good CEO. He was way worse than Pat. But why couldn't they just say, "Hey, he's not a good CEO for the future of the company. You're fired." No. And this is the problem with the board.
Oh, they wanted to make it easy for themselves. They probably knew that was a get out of jail free card. The affair he had with a subordinate, like just throwing that out there will be chum and no one will question us, even though you probably could have just said he's not doing a good job. But he could have tried to defend that, right? Because technically Intel still was on paper looked okay, and he couldn't defend this other thing, and it was a shortcut to make sure he got fired, right? Bringing that up.
Yeah, the thing is I know a lot of people on boards. I had dinner with them over the last week because they're all in town for the conferences, and I asked them that because I've never been on a board, but they said, hey, listen, the board chooses the CEO, they can fire no matter what, and they'll just give them a nice package and stuff, and usually they give the CEO a choice. Said, hey, we're going to fire you for a reason. What reason do you want? And what package will you take? And it's just like, I can't believe BK would say, yeah, you know what? Fire me for adultery because I need a job, And he did. He took that. He left that company and took a CEO job somewhere. I don't think he's working now. I haven't seen him. But, who's going to pick, embarrass my family with the adultery story? And, for Pat Gelsinger, they walked him out, and so it must have been a really heated discussion. I haven't heard the scoop yet. It'll come out. But, they walked the guy out. They could have said, hey, next year we're going to have a transition. Pat's going to be here during the transition, blah, blah, blah. But it was refirement. I tell you, it just boggles the mind why boards make these types of decisions, because to us folks, the investors and the customers, it looks really bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe there's an inside story. I don't know. But it's a vote of no confidence for the Intel board. Yet another one.
This piece of content is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Just in the past few weeks, Dan built a new PC with a fresh install of Windows 11 on a blazing fast Gen 5 NVMe SSD. And of course, that code for Windows 11 came from CDkeyoffer.com. And we've been using CDkeyoffer.com at Moore's Law Z for a very long time. I use it for my office software on both my desktop and my laptop, and that's because they're reliable. They've always been there for us, and they offer reasonable prices for Microsoft products that are usually set, in my opinion, at monopolistic pricing. And you know what? They're actually having a Black Friday sale right now. So if you're looking to get the best pricing on Microsoft software or games or other products on their website as well, please show support for a company that's shown support for the Moore's Law is Dead team and community for years by using offer code BROKENSILICON to get 25% off all Microsoft software and Die Shrink to get 3% off everything else. Again, you're supporting the channel even if you just click on the links in the description. But of course, also, if you need these products, getting them through CDkeyoffer.com during their big Black Friday sale, well, that helps the channel even more. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out CDkeyoffer.com today. Yeah, I mean, I would guess with BK, he was gonna fight it, and maybe they I'm just guessing, but he was gonna fight them, and they dragged that out to make sure he couldn't. Is what I would suggest. I don't know if you think that's impossible, but and then with Pat, I have to. I guess I've heard some things over the years about like fights between Pat and like the future of the company, and I have to imagine, or I guess you tell me if you think this is a bad assumption. My suspicion is just, at this point, and I want to get to the 18A stuff too, like whether it's not going as well as some news websites have portrayed 18A. I've seen some discussion that there's kind of a hatchet job on how 18A is doing. Maybe it's doing better than it was recently reported by a few websites. But maybe it still just isn't doing as well as the board wanted. I think there's a certain degree where like Meteor Lake didn't pan out. Arrow Lake definitely hasn't panned out. And then Battlemage is not looking at all competitive. I mean, it's got the die size of Nvidia's 4070 Ti, which is a like $700-800 graphics card, and yet it's going to compete with Nvidia's $300 4060. Meaning, there's no way there's going to make any margins on this. I just can't help but wonder, like, Arc really became Pat's baby, and the IDM thing became Pat's baby. Do you just think a lot of bad news? I guess the knives were probably already out at the beginning of this year, and just a ton of bad news came out over the past couple of weeks, and they just said, you know what, we're done, Pat. I mean, do you think that's what could have happened, or?
Well, the board guys told me that being a board member is, a lot like being in high school. You want everybody to like you, right? Because all these board members have to get along to, make the company successful and, make progress. And so, there's a lot of discussions in the boardroom, outside the boardroom. And, if you don't get along with the board, you generally resign, right? And so one of the board members resigned, Lip-Bu Tan. And, I know Lip-Bu. He is in my industry. I've known him for years. He was the CEO of Cadence. Cadence is one of my biggest customers. I work with Cadence probably maybe 20 years. So I know him pretty well. And, some people said it was a health issue. Lip-Bu said, "Oh, I need more time with my family." There's always a good excuse. Lip-Bu is he's a gentleman, a very proper fellow. He's never going to say anything bad about anybody. But you know what? The real story is going to come out, and it always comes out. And so there's more information about Pat's firing or retiring. We just don't have it yet, but it'll come out. But here's why Lip-Bu left. Lip-Bu came aboard, and first thing he said was cut expenses. And, he did this at Cadence. He did this. I mean, you just have to cut expenses. And Pat did the opposite. He hired 15,000 people, right? The first year out of the chute. And he spent so much money. And, you just have to be a little more cautious with your capital. And so that's what I was told just recently why Lip-Bu resigned. It's because of the cost issues. Lip-Bu didn't resign because he wanted the manufacturing split. That was another rumor. Lip-Bu didn't have an argument with Pat. He just told the board, "Listen, I don't think this is the right way to go. And this really isn't good for me." And Lip-Bu has never been on a big board like Intel. He's on 100 boards, small companies. He's an investor. So, that's why he left. And that's really the heart of the problem is Intel just spends too much money. Mm-hmm. I was somebody on LinkedIn asked me to be a friend, and I looked at, and it was a young lady, and she was an executive coach for Intel. Mm-hmm. So for the last 10 years, she was an executive coach for Intel, and I swear to you, I had never even met one. Why does Intel have executive coaches? This is ridiculous. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You go to Nvidia, doesn't have executive coaches. Go to Broadcom, you'll see the tightest ship, the most frugal company in this industry is Broadcom. And it's because Hock Tan, another gentleman who I met, and he was honored just last night at this dinner, or 2 nights ago, he knows how to run a company. And, you don't spend money you don't have. It's like building the baseball field, build your dream and people will come. It's like, that's not how semiconductors work, right? So that's really the big problem is Pat had a big dream, and for many reasons, it didn't come true. And, I assumed he would leave, but I just didn't assume it would be in this manner.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he'd probably be pushed out or something within a few years. I didn't know it would happen this week, this quickly. Yeah. I one thing I'd say about Pat is I feel like he thinks it was a big mistake that they quit GPU like a decade or whatever it was ago. And also thinks they should have built up their fabs quicker and so on and so forth. And I think 10, 15 years ago, he was right. I mean, imagine if when everyone was cutting orders for silicon in 2020, Intel would have been there with more fabs, with a graphics card ready during a mining boom. I think he was right 10 or 15 years ago, but it kind of feels like he took over eventually. And then he was like, all the things that I've been arguing for 15 years, we're still going to do those things, even if maybe we're a little late to the party. And it reminds me of people that, I don't know, since I bring this up example a ton, like people since like 2010 who are just like, the stock market's going to go to zero, only buy gold. And I mean, if that happens 5 years from now, they weren't right. They were wrong for 19 out of 20 years. And just because you said everything's terrible for 20 years straight doesn't mean you were right. It means finally a broken record was right. And do you think there's anything you were timing with Pat where like he was right about these things in the past, he took over, and all of his initiatives were kind of backward looking and not the plays that they needed to make now?
Yeah, it's the hockey saying of, don't go to where the puck is, go where it's going to be. And, during my career, I worked with a GPU company. I worked with a company called ATI, who was bought by AMD. And this was back in the early days before Nvidia was, big and famous, but Nvidia was there. And so we kept finding, and before that, I was in the CPU business, and we kept finding new uses for GPUs. And it was just incredible to see these things run. And, nobody could have predicted what would happen with AI and GPUs. But, GPUs had so many uses. And Intel, they just missed the boat, right? And they missed it by a mile on GPUs.
Mm-hmm.
And even AI processors, they bought a couple, maybe more than two, but one of the companies I had worked with, they bought them, and they pretty much just fired them after they bought them. And they bought a couple more. I guess Habana Labs is one of the ones, or maybe Amazon bought that one. But anyway, they've just missed it every time. And this is part of Intel. They were so set on CPUs and x86 that they really didn't branch out and look at other options, because it would hurt their 8086 sales, or eat up some of their existing business, which they had a monopoly on. But they just missed the mark by so many. And you want to say Nvidia guys are brilliant. They certainly are, but they're pretty lucky. They were in the right place at the right time. The one thing that Nvidia does good is they pivot. So if you look at the history of Nvidia, in fact, somebody just sent me a book. They wrote a book about the history of Nvidia. They pivoted. They weren't always successful. They did make mistakes, but they were able to say, "Hey, this is a mistake. I need to pivot." And Intel is not good at that. They're just not good at pivoting. And so that's something that they need to get better at. What's going to happen with the chip business? Well, we talked about this before. People are doing their own chips. Apple started it. Apple does their own SoC. It's the best SoC in the market, right? So everybody else is doing it. And there are chip projects at Amazon that are just amazing. Microsoft that are amazing. Google, oh my God, Google spends so much money developing these chips. They don't care. They just got so much money. And so, of course, they're going to be better chips than Intel can make or anybody else can make. They're not selling them, so they don't have that burden. But the market's changed, and so Intel just didn't pivot. They should have cut expenses. They should have cut everything just to survive in this business, and they should have innovated in different areas and not just trying to make the best process on paper. Next week is IEDM. It's the big conference for process technologies. It's in San Francisco. And Intel's got a few papers. I have the papers, but I'm not allowed to say anything about them until next week. I have the head Intel guy, Mr. Transistor, they call him. He developed all the transistors, high-K metal gate, FinFETs, gate all around. He's working on CFETs. He's on my podcast. I think it'll be published on Sunday. There's some amazing things coming out of Intel. Backside power is an amazing technology out of Intel. We would not have this technology if it wasn't for Intel. FinFETs, Intel. High metal gates, Intel. They're very innovative. They brought us so many things. We need them to continue doing that, right? But they need to be able to make money at it. And you can't make money at it the way you used to. You know what I mean?
Well, that was a question I was going to ask too, is like, maybe they're not quite where TSMC is, but they're pretty close, certainly doing better than really anyone else for sure after TSMC at this point, in terms of like the actual quality of the silicon they can make. But is it actually cost competitive? Because that's a thing that I would be concerned about. I don't remember which product it was, but I remember being told that, like, I think it was what their graphics ones. Like the fact of the matter is, like, a lot of their nodes actually cost more than TSMC. That's also why they went to TSMC for some of their products. And if they're not filling their own fabs because they're losing market share, and no one seems to want to bet on Intel, they're making a lot of great nodes, but like, how do they fix that? And again, tell me if I'm wrong, that their nodes might not be as high margin as what TSMC has managed to achieve as a completely, as a fab only company. Like how do they get to a point though where they can be the trailing edge node that's still high quality compared to TSMC if they actually can't sell it for a better price than TSMC?
Yeah, semiconductors really is about pricing. It always has been. We reduce the prices of our semiconductors every year. It's like no other industry, right? Cars, can you get a car cheaper this year than you did last year? Well, no. So drugs too, it's just semiconductors, by definition, we always go for cheaper. And one way to get them cheaper is to increase the density in the specific area. But there's other ways. Here's the thing. It's really about economies of scale, right? So if you build 1 billion wafers, your economies of scale is going to be so much lower, so much cheaper than if you're building 1 million wafers. I mean, that's just the way it is. And all the partners and all the ecosystem are going to surround you. the person who makes the most wafers, the billion, wafer customer, they're just going to throw things at you, resources, everything. And so TSMC has that. They have all these partners throwing money at them, sharing R&D costs, sharing manufacturing costs, sharing everything. Everybody wants to work with Intel. When I first started in the industry, IBM was the big one. Everybody wanted to work with IBM. I had an offer from IBM. I didn't want to work there because everybody was going to work there. I wanted to work for the scrappy startup, But that's the way TSMC is now. And I don't know how you compete with that. The ecosystem is just huge and it gets bigger every day. But let's look at it. TSMC follows Intel. There's two versions of high-K metal gate. There's gate first and gate last. Samsung, IBM went one way, Intel went the other way, and TSMC followed them. The FinFETs, TSMC followed them. Backside power delivery, TSMC is going to follow them. Is it going to be technically as good as Intel's backside power? Probably not. But they will cooperate and collaborate with customers, and they'll get the best version that the customers can use, right? So that's how TSMC works. They look at the customer and they look at the process. They say, let's figure out what we can do here that'll be low risk, low cost, yet deliver good power performance area, right? So meanwhile, Intel is in the lab coming up with these brilliant technologies, and then TSMC just borrows them and makes them for the masses, that's really what it is happening here.
So, all right. Things don't look very good for Intel right now. What do you think could be done if they do run out of money? Because there's been all of these rumors. Qualcomm, Samsung, Apple. I think there was rumors that there's someone in the Department of Defense or something nudging AMD. Would you ever merge with Intel? Think about it. Like basically any name that you could think of that would buy out, merge, or take a part of Intel. The rumors surfaced, and there's probably a lot of truth to. There are probably talks going on behind the scenes, or I should say there definitely are. But what do you think could actually possibly happen? Like, because the thing I imagine is, could there be some sort of foundry agreement? I think there already is something that came in the news with Samsung and Intel, but like, Samsung getting some more help with their foundries from Intel using Samsung's name. So maybe people will go to them because Samsung does have customers. People are scared to work with Intel, so maybe there could be something there. At the same time, selling off parts of the company, or like what parts could be sold off? Could they sell off a portion of their fabs if they're simply not making the money? What do you think can happen?
So I do M&A, but I do smaller versions of M&A with smaller companies. So I would never be involved in anything like an Intel or one of these big ones. But I do M&A, and I do run in the circles. And, there's different types of acquisitions. The acquisitions I prefer are what we call 1 + 1 = 3, where when you combine the companies, it makes a greater company, right? And I've done a lot of acquisitions with Siemens. They're a $100 billion company. Synopsys, Cadence. These are big companies, but they're buying small companies, in the 5 to 10 to 20 to $30 million space. But it's still the same. The product has to have a 1 + 1 = 3 in order to justify the acquisition, or it's an asset liquidation, right? It happens. One just happened, and they got 20 cents on the dollar. Not great, but it's better than 0 cents on the dollar, right? And there's things, in between. With Intel, though, I don't think there are any suitors that are appropriate. I think there's one, but certainly not Qualcomm. I know Qualcomm really well. First thing they would do is, shut down the fabs or throw the fabs out and take the design groups. That makes no sense whatsoever.
Intel's worth more than that today, for sure.
And think about it. So here's a funny thing. You and I talked about this. This was before Intel was using TSMC, and I thought it was exciting because Intel and AMD would be using the same fab processes, right? So this is really a design shootout, right? Because if you're designing to one process, your own process, and somebody's designing to TSMC, that's not really an apples comparison, right? For a design shootout. So we've seen it now. TSMC-based products from Intel are coming out in bits and pieces, and you know what? They're good, but are they heads above AMD? No. In fact, sometimes I'd say AMD has the lead, based on some of the chips, and you would know maybe better than I would. So the design group at Intel, yeah, you would have a pretty strong design group, but you'd probably have to fire half the people, just to get it productive and meanwhile, productive and financially successful. But, having your own process and designing to your own process really gives you an advantage, right? But you have to have good designers, which they do, and you have to have a good process, which they haven't had, but now they do. So, unfortunately for Pat, his time ran out, but they are on the right road. 18A is a good process.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know it more than most people. There people are saying, well, it's not yielding. Well, that's not true.
Okay, I did want you to confirm, like, if you think that was true or not, because I've seen a lot of pushback on
it's
that.
not true. The funny thing about yield numbers is the day you mention them, they're obsolete because yield changes. And by the way, sometimes yield gets worse. They make a tweak and yield gets worse. But generally, you make tweaks to the process or tweaks to the design and yield goes up and yield goes up. And so here's the problem is Intel came out with a 1.0 PDK, and it really wasn't a 1.0 PDK, especially by TSMC's terms. It was more like a 0.8. It wasn't ready. So, Intel pushed it out and people said, hey, this isn't good. This isn't going to yield. We're going to pass. And then Intel had to go back and say, okay, let's fix it. Well, they did. But the reason why they pushed it out early is because of the board and Pat, because Pat set the expectations. What did he say? 5 nodes in 4 years, right?
Yeah.
That's the big thing that's absurd. And they're still saying that. Look what I did, 5 nodes in 4 years. Well, you didn't do that. You're counting 7 nanometer, which is 10 nanometer, which was years late. And then, you're counting 3 and 4 as different processes. They're the same process. It's just optimized. And then you canceled 20, and now you have 18 that's not even ready yet. And it's just like they set up this failure, right? 5 nodes in 4 years. It can't be done. And it wasn't done. But they're still saying, hey, we did it. It's just insulting to us people in the trenches who are designing semiconductors because it's just a blatant lie.
Well, yeah, and I guess this isn't a CPU, but it's a GPU. We really do have apples to apples. Even if you compare Zen 5 to Arrow Lake, you could go, well, it's using this whole platform from Meteor Lake that had issues and multiple tiles. But with graphics, monolithic, same node family, Battlemage. I guess I'll tell everybody here, I already have results from websites that have tested the B580. It's like 8 to 10% faster than the 4060 that puts it around 2080 super performance. And for the people who will end up watching this, I'm going to put graphics on screen right now that show that, like, basically it's around a 2080 super, and it's using the same amount of silicon almost as a 4070 Ti. If I look at Tech PowerUp's chart of, like, performance, Nvidia is able to extract over 80% more performance from the same amount of silicon for a graphics card, same nodes. So yeah, that's, and I think that is, I wonder, seeing something like that is what made Pat eventually go, because Arc is his baby. Again, it would have been a bunch of things, not just that. But this could have been the final straw, because they look and they go, you told us we're going to stick with GPU, even though it seemed like we missed the boat. And we're selling something 80% worse than what NVIDIA can make with the same process. This is going nowhere. And by the way, NVIDIA has more money, so we're not going to catch up next gen. They're going to spend more than us and make a better architecture that is sailed. And that should be scaring investors, I think, far more than any 10% loss for a CPU, is seeing NVIDIA make a chip 80% better with the same node.
Yeah, and as I told you, Google and Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook, they're spending huge amounts of money on developing these chips because they have trillions of dollars at stake, with their data centers, and AI is blowing up data centers, right? So there's going to be even more data centers and more chips coming from other companies. And, the x86 or ARM or something, they can be house cleaning chips, made maintenance chips on these big server boards, but they're not going to be the big workhorses that they used to be, right? They're not going to do all the number crunching. It's going to be chips from Nvidia, chips, done internally. It's just, the market has moved. And so anybody that says, well, the Intel design group is worth all the money, it's not true. We have better design groups in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And especially if you're doing AI stuff, right? NVIDIA has the most talented designers. Apple has the most talented designers, right? AMD and Intel don't have the most talented designers. They're not bad. They do well in what their market is, but you can't stay in that market. You have to move. You have to pivot. And so if you separate Intel design and Intel manufacturing, think about it. What do you have? You really don't have leading edge anything, right? You do have some leading edge technologies that are coming to market now, but you don't have the ability to manufacture them to the economies of scale that you need to be successful as far as Wall Street's concerned, right? Because you're up against TSMC, and they're always going to mention TSMC, always going to mention Nvidia, and you're never ever going to make it to that level. It's just the way it is. And so you have to reset your expectations of what can Intel do. Here's something they can do. A long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, some of the foundries, so what happened was TSMC was the leader in the fabs for years. And everybody would follow them and copy their design rules so you could take a chip that was designed at TSMC to multiple fabs. So I worked on a chip at 40 nanometer with Qualcomm, and they did it at TSMC, and then they moved manufacturing to UMC and SMIC and Charter, and that's how they got the best pricing. And, TSMC was pissed because they did all the hard work. So TSMC started making some changes, and the other fabs bound together, and they did this thing called Common Platform. This is about 10 years ago. And it was IBM, Samsung, and UMC. And they made a 28 nanometer that all of them could manufacture. So you could take a design to each of the fabs and do second and third source. But it failed. And that gave TSMC a huge amount of 28 nanometer share. And that's really what launched TSMC into the stratosphere. Today, look at the foundries. They don't have leading edge processes, right? Some of them have 14 nanometer that they got from Samsung. Samsung has leading edge processes that don't yield, and nobody likes Samsung. So, where are these fabs? Global, UMC, where are they going to go? Intel has the opportunity to do a common platform type thing where they said, hey, we're going to be the foundry for other foundries. And we're going to make chips. And they've made some announcements similar to this with Tower and UMC, but I tell you, I don't think they're going anywhere. And especially with Pat not there, they're probably not going to go anywhere. But Intel needs to
I heard that the Tower thing's falling apart. That's what I've heard.
Well, they tried to acquire Tower. That fell apart, but they were trying to do some sales thing going. But I know the guys, and they said, hey, nothing's happened yet. And with Pat leaving, I think that's not a good thing for that type of deal. But think about it, is Intel has all this technology, and they have fab space. If they could just fill these fabs, and they wouldn't have to make a huge amount of money on these wafers, they would just have to make 10% margin, and that would give them the capacity and the volumes to get the economies of scale and to get the better pricing and the bigger partners, and they could really be an influence in this world. Because if they don't, who's going to be left? It's just TSMC, right? But if they can get Global Foundries, Tower, UMC, and a couple other fabs ramping up on technologies, and Intel would only have to do N-2, the latest and greatest node, N-2, get these people on 14 nanometer and 7 nanometer and then 4 nanometer, but you're still a couple nodes ahead. And, fill your fabs and become a force in the business. I mean, I think they could do it in that manner, but they also are going to need help from the U.S. government. I think Intel is imperative to keep the design and manufacturing together and to build a manufacturing base in the United States. And I think a CHIPS Act 2 is going to be coming. And we have to recognize that Intel needs this help. We shouldn't be giving money to TSMC, the most successful foundry. They're getting billions of dollars. Do they need it? No, they really don't. Samsung, yeah, they might need it for their semiconductor business, but Samsung Global is a huge company. So, we got to say, where's our money going to go? Well, we need to build US, right? And it's going to take years, but Intel is the only one that can do it today. Without Intel, design and manufacturing put together, I just don't see how we're going to do it. We're going to have to finance Samsung and TSMC to build in the US. That just seems wrong.
Yeah, that's, I've heard it a bit behind the scenes. One person told me that their opinion was that some people at the DoD, when they started cutting some of the CHIPS funding, went around, looked at Intel, and they said, we don't like what we see. We're worried if we give them money, it's not going to go as far as if we give someone else. I mean, is it really such a bad idea to just have TSMC in the United States making products if you think they'll be a more reliable partner to actually make what they say they're going to, though?
Well, I love TSMC. I worked with them for many years. I think having them in the U.S. is great, but it's only really a piece of the manufacturing, right? I mean, the wafers are still going to go back to Taiwan, and people want to be sustainable with the semiconductors because we know semiconductors are critical to every part of our lives, and the only way to do that is to build it up in the U.S., right? There is a conflict in North Korea and South Korea. By the way, South Korea does 70% of the memory in the semiconductor business. And where are we going to be without memory? The rest of the logic silicon is not going to be useful. We have to have memory, right?
So do you think building up Intel's important because they'll build up the other parts of the supply chain as well in the U.S., whereas TSMC you're mostly just funding the fabs, but the heat sinks, the boards, all this other stuff, like Intel will probably bring more of that into the US as well that you also need, to build something?
Well, they can. But so if you look at the United States, the United States actually has more fabs than any other country. We have fabs. It's just they're old. And, so we do have the infrastructure at the trailing edge. If you look at Intel and Micron, if we help them, they could be, the leaders in their market segments. Micron is really competing against the Korean government, right? So Hynix and Samsung, they get a lot of help. I mean, we need to be that proactive in the semiconductor industry, the same level of proactive Taiwan was, China is, North Korea is, and now Europe is. The U.S. is not. As I said, I love the CHIPS Act, but really, we gave more money to non-U.S. based companies than U.S. based companies, right? So we gave Samsung, and I get notifications. I talk to the people. I'm friends with some of the people. They wanted to have a level playing field, and I agree. That's a great idea. But I think a CHIPS Act 2 should be, we need to shore up Intel, we need to shore up Micron, and we need to get packaging in the United States. We do have some, but most of the packaging is still outside of the United States.
Yeah, I think this was something me and you discussed previously as well when you were on before. Like, it's, look, a lot of these politicians don't actually, I'll just say it, know what they're talking about when it comes to anything technical. And they're like, well, if we bring fabs, then you can make an iPhone here. And it's like, well, no, the heat sink, the packaging, the screens, all of that actually still comes from outside. Like you're saying CHIPS Act 2 needs to much, much more intelligently and holistically go, what is everything we need to build a PC? It can't just be we throw $100 billion at a fab. We need everything else that goes along with a fab too to come back to the US.
Yeah, I'm just using Micron and Intel as an example because they're easy. But yeah, there's quite a few other pieces. And, my view is we need to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And, usually we get the best. But, worst case is we get cut off either in some form. And, China's already cutting us off. They're cutting us off with minerals and this and that. And our new administration, God bless them, I think it's going to get worse. So we really need to work on our self-sufficiency. And, I'm a big taxpayer. I'm happy to pay taxes. It hurts me every time I write these big fat checks.
Yeah.
But I was happy to see the CHIPS Act. And by the way, I'm happy to see people looking at government spending because I think we spend too much on things that we really don't need. But the CHIPS Act is something we really need.
So how much, I want to get back to the CHIPS Act specifically, but how much discussion do you hear, like in the hallways at these events, behind the scenes, worrying about things like tariffs? Because I've spoken to some major retailers and I've heard that the stockpiling is already happening. Actually, it's universal. The amount of in retail and in distributors have told me that we're buying up extra memory, we're buying up extra low-end graphics cards, we're buying up extra this and this and this in case tariffs, who knows what the number is. A new number's thrown out every day by the oncoming administration, 10, 20, 100, 1,000%, whatever it is. Probably not 1,000. But how much worry is there about tariffs and kind of preemptively hoarding products right now in case there could be?
Well, we saw it with China. right? So, we put controls on what China can have, and they saw it coming and they bought as many things as they could, and they still buy things on the gray market. They get a lot through Korea.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's no stopping it. But, we stockpiled, we had 100 rolls of toilet paper in our house, but, that's just short-term thinking. You really have to think long-term, right? I have 3 grandchildren. I'm thinking about their lives, not my life. I want their lives to be happy and successful. So this is 20, 30, 40 years out. I don't know what's going to happen with these tariffs. I think, the big political arena is a poker game, and there's a lot of bluffing going on. And, hopefully cooler heads prevail, but you have to bluff. Otherwise, you're never going to win a poker game. It's just the way it is. The biggest bluffers are the biggest winners. So this is what's happening right now. The CHIPS Act guys that I know, in fact, some of them have already left because, the government facilities are going to all change, right? The people that are doing it now, the Department of Commerce, that's going to be changed, right? So these are political appointments. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But, Biden and Harris didn't actually do the CHIPS Act, right? This was a bipartisan bill started, I think it was the people in New York, the politicians, and Ohio and everybody. That's how this came about, and that's how it needs to happen again. Will it be approved by the next administration? I don't know, but I know it's going on. But, I tell you, it should be the number one importance. And I think Intel and Micron should be held up as examples because it's just so blaring to me that these two companies need to be successful for us to be successful in the semiconductor industry, which, by the way, is part of our modern life. It's part of our security. It's part of our military. It's just seems ridiculous to me. So anybody that says they're Intel apart or Qualcomm's going to buy Intel, or I just don't believe it. I think it would not be in the best interest of the United States. The one person I think would be a good acquisition candidate, and he got the award for Morris Chang, was Hock Tan. So Hock Tan, I didn't even know him until he bought Avago and Broadcom. Hock Tan can run a company. He could run Intel successfully. He is the sharpest guy. He is a no-nonsense guy. I know guys that work for him. I mean, he has so many direct reports, and he has Zoom meetings with these people, and he is 100% involved, right? And he is the most involved CEO. Maybe Jensen from Nvidia is also one.
Sure.
But he will cut that business and make it profitable. He'll probably fire half the people there. But I think that's probably what's going to happen.
Too many were hired, and it sounds like for sure you think it really needs to be an outsider that comes in and looks at Intel in a sobering third-party perspective way and go, this is how we're going to do it. We tried bringing in, the veteran who has an Intel t-shirt on, but it's time, to bring in someone who doesn't look at it as Intel. Just look at it as any other business and does what needs to be done, right?
Yes, no emotional attachment. No, we used to be the best. We're going to be the best again. It's called a pivot. It's what I call a pivot. Global Foundries did a pivot, and I worked with Global Foundries back then, and I'm the one that called it a pivot. I said, listen, you guys need to look at what you have and be successful with that and stop dreaming about 7 nanometer and 5 nanometer because you're just not going to make it. And so, it's a pivot, and that's what Intel needs to do, pivot. And the best pivot man in the business is Hock Tan. I don't know if he could pull off an acquisition. I'm not a financial guy. I don't know what the financial issues behind it. But I think the U.S. government and somebody like Hock Tan needs to get involved in Intel and say, listen, this is what the company needs to look like in the next 10 years, right? Not 5 nodes in 4 years. That's ridiculous. Now, let's say what's going to happen in the next 10 years and what is in the best interest of the United States.
This piece of content is brought to you by the Minis Forum eGPU docking station MGA1. The MGA1 is a really cool device that has a built-in RX 7600 MXT GPU that through Oculink can make any mini PC or mini laptops or handheld gaming devices game like fully fledged desktops with a dedicated graphics card because it has a built-in dedicated graphics card. But it doesn't just have that. It also has multiple outputs for multiple displays through that graphics card and multiple USB ports as well, meaning this is a full one-stop shop docking station. You can have, your portable gaming device or an Ultrabook, and then when you get home, you plug it into this and boom, it's already hooked up to all of your displays with a dedicated GPU and with output from USB to power your keyboard and mouse, and you're just ready to go when you get home and game at higher frame rates than you would if you were trying to use an iGPU. If you're interested in this product, go to the link in the description and make sure you use offer code BrokenSilicon to save $30 on this fantastic device. Doing so helps the channel. Even just clicking on the link in the description shows them you're interested in companies that are interested in supporting Moore's Law is Dead. So yeah, support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out the MJA1 today. Chris Rich writes in and he says, do you think a merger between Intel and AMD could happen? Do you think it could actually work? I think AMD's products and Intel's fabs could be an effective combination, though it would take many years, of course. And probably the biggest sticking point would be AMD's existing agreements with TSMC, as AMD will need to continue making existing parts for many years to come with them.
Well, so I know AMD, great company. The thing is that they would not be successful today without TSMC.
Mm-hmm.
That's just it, right? When they spun out the design and the manufacturing and created Global Foundries, and AMD used Global Foundries, that's when they were almost put out of existence. So this relationship with TSMC is what made AMD great again. And if you take that away, AMD will not be great again, right? And I just don't see any reason. I don't see a 1 + 1 = 3 when you put AMD and Intel together, because they overlap so much. I mean, what's the overlap between those companies? 80% or something. It's just ridiculous.
I think is where some of those rumors came from, is like, if Intel's going to fall apart, a lot of people in the government think we can't let that happen. I mean, the obvious company that you could just switch out management and make the same products would be AMD. I think the argument for AMD merging with Intel isn't a 1 + 1 = 3. It's at least Intel isn't 0 now. And, so
the 1 + 1 = 1.
Yeah, instead of -1 or something.
Yeah, it shouldn't happen. I don't think it will happen. It would be horrible. I think that the manufacturing side of Intel is very important. And if you merge them with a company that doesn't do manufacturing, like Qualcomm or Nvidia or Apple, I even hear the Apple stories. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You're just not going to make it. I think that it needs somebody that knows how to run a business. I mean, Intel knows how to make manufacture. They know how to make chips. They know how to make wafers. It's just they're not properly managed, and they're not managed to be profitable the way most companies are. Right? They were managed to be profitable when you're a monopoly. That's a different business, and that's just something is very, very rare and should never happen. Right? And the reason why AMD is successful is because they wanted an alternative to Intel. 10 years ago, AMD, the only business they got was the not Intel business. So it was companies that didn't want to do business with Intel. Again, if you're negotiating with Intel, you better go to AMD to prove that you're serious about this pricing. So that's how AMD survived for many years. Until they hooked up with TSMC, and now they have leading edge products, right? And the Intel Design Group, I'm sure they can do just fine without Intel. They would be going head to head with AMD, and they would share markets and everything. But I don't think the Intel people would be above and beyond AMD designers or any other designers. I mean, they're good, but they're used to having their own manufacturing, and they're used to having tweaks and cheats. If you have your own fab, you can do cheats, right? You can say, hey, can you guys, change this fab process real quick so our design will yield? Because we made a mistake. And so, it's just better management, but a better board. this board at Intel has failed for 20 years. I mean, that's unheard of. How are these guys? And the mistakes are blatant. Throwing Pat out is just blatant, right? And firing Bob
the way
Swan,
they did it too, right? It doesn't encourage confidence to just out of nowhere after Thanksgiving throw him out like this.
And what I said was true. Is I thought Pat would be leaving. I thought it would be in a 6 months to a year, because what he promised everybody didn't come true. So you got to pay for that. But it's how they did it. And I don't know why companies throw people out without a replacement. I mean, in my career, I've trained my replacement before, because just walking out will hurt the company, and it will hurt all the people and the customers. So, but you know what? It gives us something to talk about. But certainly, I don't think that's the purpose of the board of Intel.
Yeah, no, to make it easy for me to come up with subjects for YouTube videos, which just seems to be what they're the best at lately. Yeah, I mean, so what do you think? So it's interesting. So it seems like you, and tell me if I'm characterizing your opinion wrong, but like you think what would fix, I don't know what needs to be done with Intel is someone, like Hawktan comes in, someone who knows how to run a company, clean house with management, probably pare down any division that is not profitable or necessary, way too much headcount. Is any part of that like, because I've talked to people that have left Intel Foundries for Samsung or TSMC. I mean, I think it's, like in Texas and Arizona, you can just leave Intel, go right to a Samsung fab. Told you're paid much more, by the way. And it's a lot. They make you work hard, but at least it's consistent and there's not surprises every Friday. Is there any part of this where Intel goes, we just have too much capacity? One of our foundry area, we need to sell this to Samsung. Like, we need to sell this foundry to Samsung here, because it's losing us money and we're not filling it. And in conjunction with, maybe reducing workforce by 30%, stopping with the Arc Vanity project and just doing what you need to do to make good integrated graphics, and so on and so forth. Like is that part of it? Maybe is paring down how many fabs they have.
They have, active fabs that are manufacturing, and I don't think they have too many. The issue is they're going to build more. Right. And, they have Ohio, they have, and they're building shells. And, Intel has had empty shells before. They had a shell in Arizona that was empty for years. And, that's fine. A lot of companies do that, but they won't move the equipment in, because, the day the equipment move in is the day you depreciate, and the day, the equipment becomes, on the way to being obsolete. Right. So I think that Intel should stop building fabs, or maybe just build the shell and sit on them, because they probably got the land for free. But they really need to figure out how to fill their fabs. And you can't say, oh, we're going to build the best product and fill our fab with our own products, because we know that's not going to be the case. You're not going to have the best products anymore. You might have competitive products, but you're going to be sharing with AMD, with Nvidia, with people who are making their own silicon. It's just not going to happen. So you need to pivot and figure out ways to fill your fab. The common platform thing I mentioned is one way. I'm sure there are other ways. I could probably sit down with some Intel guys and figure it out over lunch. But they have to fill their fabs, and they have to continue their R&D to come up with this new innovative stuff. CFETs, CFETs is the next transistor technology. That's all they're talking about at IEDM next week. They're also talking about packaging. I tell you, some of the papers that are coming out of TSMC and Intel, and we'll be covering these on SemoWiki. We have 3 guys there that are myself and 2 other guys that are covering this. You're going to see some technology that's just mind-blowing. But getting it from the paper out into mass production is difficult, right? We've been talking about backside power delivery for a few years now, but it's still not in production. It takes time. Intel can do that, but they just need some help. But to do that, they have to fill these fabs, right? Because they have to be able to make all this new stuff in high volumes, be able to yield, right? So that's what the problem is with Intel right now. They need to solve is, we have too many people, we spend too much money, and we have to fill the fabs.
Do you think that could be a political fight that comes to a head in a few years then? Like, You've got all these politicians patting themselves on the back, taking pictures, cutting ribbons in Ohio. And the second they build the fab, they're like, well, what's going on? Then all the hit pieces come out. This is a failure. The CHIPS Act has failed. And because they're not manufacturing anything, and no one will like the answer of Intel going, we don't need to make more. Actually, that's not the issue.
Yeah, I hate politics. It really, really, really gives me a stomach ache, man. I just see all the money they spend, and I just wonder where it goes. And we might have Elon Musk, in the White House now cutting budgets, and I think that's going to be amusing because it's going to give some transparency to what we do with our tax dollars. And I think once we figure out how much we're spending on ridiculous things, hopefully they'll look and say, "Hey, that chip Act money was pennies. It was nothing. But semiconductors are critical." One of the projects I'm working on now is we're going to make a movie, or we're making a movie about semiconductors. It's called Silicon. It's kind of trying to be the Oppenheimer type thing for semiconductors. And we have to get people to understand how critical these semiconductors are, because I think the shortage, what was an interesting thing where people said, hey, I can't get semiconductors. I can't get a car. But there's a lot more to it. And if the people of the United States look at how their tax dollars are being spent, are being wasted, in my opinion, maybe they'll be a little smarter and say, hey, CHIPS Act 2 is a smart thing, and CHIPS Act 3 and 4, because we can see what the Taiwanese government did, we can see what the Korean government did, and we can see what China did, right? We can learn from history that, wow, this is important. It's not too late. But Intel and Micron, critical.
So we've been dancing kind of around one of these subjects here about competition with Intel. I really did want to bring this up. I don't know how much there is to say, but it's leaked. Nvidia is making, it's been rumored for years, but now they really are, from what I'm told, making an APU for laptop. In fact, the thing that surprised me the most is that it sounded like they want to try to launch it by the end of next year, if not certainly 2026. Powerful NPU, you'd expect nothing less for Nvidia. 4070 laptop performance, kind of focusing on mid-range AI gaming laptops. What do you think about this? And do you think some of Intel's laptop market share is just about to be completely eaten away by Nvidia?
Yeah, it's just the way the industry is. Clearly Intel is a wounded company, and so they're fair game. If you look at a little bit of the history, Nvidia came out with their own SoC years ago. It was when the tablet market, came out.
Yeah.
And everybody's, the tablets are going to replace PCs and this and that. And, I'm an Apple person. I actually worked on the early Apple products. And so I knew tablets are cool. I have one. I've had one. But they aren't going to replace laptops. They haven't. So NVIDIA dropped it and pivoted. This is one of the pivots I was telling you about, is they're so important because you have to say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake. We got to move on. And I don't see that enough in some of these other companies like Intel. So with NVIDIA, with ARM, with RISC-V, we do a lot of work with RISC-V. I tell you, I monitor the design wins in companies that I work with and through the ecosystem. And just about every design win I've seen last year has RISC cores on it, RISC-V. And, it's a similar thing. It's like AMD versus Intel. ARM is strong-arming people, and they're looking for alternatives. So now they're going to get RISC-V. And so, you're going to see laptops with RISC-V. You're going to see laptops with ARM. You're going to see laptops with NVIDIA. And, we've had these around, but they just haven't caught on.
Right.
But I think with NVIDIA, it's a little bit more compelling. Not just, hey, here's a cheap CPU, It's, holy cow, you have some graphics on your tablet that are, unmatched. So, but it's horrible for Intel and AMD, by the way. They're going to lose part of their market. It's just the way it is. And that's how we succeed in this business. Competition brings innovation, right? And Intel pushes TSMC, TSMC pushes Intel. We have to have that type of competition. NVIDIA, God bless them. They're sitting on a big pile of cash. They can do whatever they want. But they're innovating, and they're going to bring us stuff at the laptop level that we haven't had. I think there's going to be a good market for it.
And you think they could make ARM on Windows work better than Qualcomm did? Because I think, Qualcomm actually, to make like a war analogy, they were the first people out of the landing boat on D-Day. No one, very, very unthanked job to be the first person to really try to get ARM to work with Windows. But they did lay the groundwork. And I'm assuming you think that Nvidia, if anyone could do the software right, do you think they could make it truly work ARM on Windows without all the compatibility issues Qualcomm had?
Well, you have to remember, this isn't just an ARM core on a laptop, which we tried and it didn't necessarily succeed. This is NVIDIA's, they're using RISC-V too, by the way, but this is NVIDIA's version of the ARM instruction set applied to their specific technology, right? So the NVIDIA ARM stuff and the Qualcomm ARM stuff are completely different. No commonality whatsoever.
Well, half the Qualcomm issues were their graphics as well. It didn't even have to do with the CPU.
Yeah. And, graphics is so important, more than ever before. And it's not just graphics, it's AI and the ability to process, inferences and process the AI technology. I don't know how much time you've spent with the AI stuff, but it's big in our industry. And the AI-enabled tools for developing chips are incredible, and I've been spending a lot of time on it. I look at these things, and I talk to people who are doing chips with AI-enabled software, and it's impressive. And it's going to change our industry. It's going to turn it upside down. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs, to be honest with you, because you will not need that many people to do a chip. When I first started in the industry, we had these things called tall, thin engineers, and it was literally one person that could develop the whole chip, right? And, we helped him, but it was one person. And now there's hundreds of people that are required to develop a chip. Well, that's going to get down to not maybe one tall engineer, but
maybe
it's going
10
to be
or something, right?
It's going to be a lot less, especially in the verification market, which is where the most bodies are. So that's what we're working on. And I tell you, we need power for that. We need graphics power. We need AI processing power. We develop chips on laptops, right? We develop chips on Intel-based servers, Linux servers. We need more power, right? And so you bring it to our laptop, you bring it to our server farm, it's going to be big.
Melodic Warrior writes and says, hello and welcome back to the podcast. I have a really wild question. ARM. I've heard rumors and whispers behind the scenes over and over that they might try to design and launch a discrete graphics card. It sounds like they want to hit the gaming market first before going for others. Based off reports of them increasing the number of staff for their graphics division, I'm suspicious that the fruit of this labor may blossom in the next 3 to 4 years. And I wanted your take on the topic and if you've heard anything relevant about this.
Well, I have. I actually co-authored a book on ARM. It's the definitive history of ARM. You can get it on Amazon for the hard copy. If you just want a PDF version, you can go to SemiWiki and look on the books tab. All the books I have published are on that tab. I give them away via PDF. ARM is a very interesting company, and they have changed quite a bit, but really they're staying the same. ARM is developing their own chips, and officially they're saying it's for reference designs. It's to assist our customers, etc. But in the ARM business plan, in my opinion, becoming a chip company is part of the plan, and that's going to take them above and beyond where they are today, which is just an IP company, right? And so they're hiring people. I know some of the people that they've hired. They're buying tools. They're going to do chips,
including discrete GPUs. You think?
I can't say that for a fact, but that's one of the places I would go.
So yeah. And I know that's been rumored for years. And I kind of want to bring this full circle on this, though. It's like the worry about Intel. I think keeping Intel doing better than doing worse is less messy. But look, if Intel falls apart, what do we get? Well, we're going to have Nvidia making laptop chips instead of Intel, ARM making graphics cards instead of Intel. Aren't you confident, though, that and I don't think Intel will completely collapse, but I guess I don't know anymore for sure. Even if Intel became a company half as big, a fourth as big, this vacuum is going to get filled by AMD, Apple, ARM, Qualcomm, Nvidia quickly, right? They will make the things Intel was making. They will serve those markets, right?
Absolutely agree. ARM is an interesting company, but let me tell you, they are a company built by errors. And that's what I wrote in the book. And the former chairman of ARM read the book. I gave him a copy of the book, and he actually did the forward. And he said, you're absolutely right. We made so many mistakes, but, we got lucky, we got timed, we got it right. But for ARM to do bigger and better, they're going to have to pivot. They're going to have to, think outside the box. But I tell you, some of the things that's been happening at ARM lately, the lawsuit with Qualcomm is just ridiculous. And we went through this with Apple and stuff. So I don't really have a lot of faith in ARM. Yeah, I didn't buy their stock when they went public. I know I should have because it's worth so much more. But I just don't really have a grip on what that company is trying to do.
So yeah, you think they're going to. You have no idea if they'll be wildly successful, though.
I don't. I know they're trying. Just like Nvidia's, branching out. But ARM really never had a great GPU. So they had one. It was okay. I think Imagination Technologies was what Apple used years ago before they built their own. But ARM really needs a good GPU. Whether they do that with a discrete chip or something else, I don't know. But they're definitely working on
it. So Root Knight writes in, and he says, with the coming years being set up as a competition between x86 and ARM platforms, do you foresee companies like AMD and Nvidia getting more and more involved in Windows design to make sure they won't lose market share because of the OS doing things incorrectly? There's tons of stuff about that with the Zen 5 launch, and then even Arrow Lake with Intel. It says, also, do you think there is room for them and OEMs to ditch Windows altogether on some products, like maybe AMD partnering with Valve to make their own consumer version of Linux, like they're basically already doing with SteamOS?
I don't know. That's really not my area of expertise. I am a Windows user, and I hate Windows. I mean, it just annoys me. It's always doing something wrong, and now they're pushing us to Windows 7, and Microsoft is so invasive in my PC. But I'm actually switching.
You gotta love OneDrive, right?
Yeah, OneDrive. That's another story. But I'm switching to Apple. I've been a PC user since the first IBM XT in 1984. But I've had enough.
It's funny you say that, though, because I'm getting there. A lot of people, I mostly talk about gaming hardware on PC. That means Windows. The sentiment in the Moore's Law's Dead Discord on the Patreon, a lot of people are fed up with things just not like I'll give an example that's nuts to me. I'm using Windows 10 right now because I don't want to switch to 11 until I have to, which will be in a year, I guess. And there's this thing called Paint 3D. It's not the best app for quickly making little graphics, but it's very quick though, despite its issues. And now, when you open it, it says support ended November 4th. And it's like, well, I don't need support. I'm making the beginning of a thumbnail for a YouTube video. I don't need any updates. And if I right click on a picture right now in a folder, there's edit, then print. And then it says edit with Paint 3D. That's a default option when you right click on a picture in Windows 10. I'm clicking on this now and it goes, you'll need a new app. It's built into Windows when you right click on something to use Paint 3D. It was a default app that came with the operating system. And they won't even let me right click and open with it anymore. I have to go to a different option that is open with, and then it works. It's like they're trying to make Windows 10 unusable to move to Windows 11. I think it's it might be intentional. And I don't know how they think that can win over people. And could it happen? Valve is trying to make Linux more and more be user friendly. Do you think we could get to a point where the support is there with other operating systems that people actually challenge Microsoft Windows, and in 5 years, maybe HP and Dell actually have another option and it really is popular and well supported enough that it's viable?
I certainly hope so. But, my wife and I are of the age where, when I first started, we used to hack together our own drivers and now I just want it to work,
Yeah.
And Windows 10 and Windows 11 don't work, not for me. So I've had an iPhone and an iPad. They work perfectly. and they're so easy to use. And I probably use 10% of the functionality. I guess that's the only sad thing is, I don't fully utilize all the capabilities it has. I don't use the AI stuff yet, but I think Microsoft has lost its perspective on what it's going to take to get the masses to continue to use their products. We'll see what happens, but my kids don't even want to use laptops. They're all on their phones and tablets. I think that's probably going to be more of a trend with younger folks. We'll just have to see.
AMD is working on something called Sound Wave. It's an ARM APU. I actually leaked this a week after we talked the last time you were on, so I don't believe we got a chance to talk about it. But what do you think about AMD? I think it's mostly a Skunksworks project, but one that's picked up steam internally. But what do you think about AMD making this ARM APU? My personal opinion is it's just an option. If it's good, they prove they can do ARM, I guess now like Nvidia or like the X Elite with Qualcomm. And also, I know they were bidding on like the Nintendo Switch 2, which uses ARM core. So there's an argument that like maybe they should have an ARM core in case a customer wants them to design an APU and they don't want x86. That's kind of what I assume Soundwave is filling out their portfolio for customers. But I wonder if you agree with that and what you think about AMD working on an APU and a CPU family that is ARM based.
Yeah, so they've done it before. And I think they bought a couple companies that did it, and it didn't work out. But I think, listen, it's a lot of this is about timing. You have to time it right. And I've seen some great products, hit the window, just smash. And I've seen some great products, some not so great products, make it right through an open window and be successful. So I think that they have the technology and they certainly have the staff. I mean, I am so impressed. Every time I'm on a panel now, there's always an AMD person on there. And let me tell you, there's some brilliant, brilliant people there. I think they have to. That's just the bottom line. And if it either will be ARM or it'll be RISC-V, they already have RISC-V cores on their designs, small ones hidden here and there. But I think they have to because Nvidia is coming, right? They're coming to the laptop near you. And there's going to be a lot more companies coming. And I don't think the x86 architecture is good for AI, and it's going to be a RISC instruction set. Will it be ARM? Will it be RISC-V? I don't know. In the industry, there used to be a lot of microprocessor architectures. We had MIPS, we had all this stuff. I worked for a computer company. We made our own chip, but they're all going to RISC-V. So Synopsys is RISC-V. One of my other customers, Andes, is RISC-V. These two companies had their own processor cores, right? But everybody's going to RISC-V, and from bottom to top. So AMD would be crazy to look at other instruction sets. Personally, I think ARM is misbehaving. I would rather see the RISC-V people. I went to the RISC-V summit recently, and I was impressed by the papers that were for all over the place. And guess what? Most of the papers for RISC-V were out of China and India, and the U.S. is so behind. We're gonna pay for it, guaranteed. But you have to have multiple architectures, and AI is going to require it.
So, is this another boat Intel could be missing, though? Because I don't hear, and I don't know, 100,000 people work there. I don't know everything they're working on. I don't pretend to, just because I hear things sometimes. But I hear Nvidia's just guns blazing, going for it as quickly as possible. AMD's following them. Actually, AMD I think started maybe first, but Nvidia's just might leapfrog them when it comes out into the market. I don't hear about Intel making ARM CPUs. Do you think this could be another boat they're missing, or do you think they definitely are? I don't know.
Well, they bought a couple companies. I forget I can't remember the names.
Sure.
But they were ARM-based architecture, AI chips. And if you look at it, most of the AI chips are ARM-based. They have the architecture somewhere in there. So Intel does have the inside expertise, assuming these people are still there. So this is something they're going to have to do. Intel has so much going on. They have Altera, right? I mean, they should be spinning Altera out, or I guess they spun it out, but they should be selling that. Mobileye, they really need to get back to the core technology of microprocessors, and that's where they've been successful at. I think the other stuff they're doing is quite the distraction, but I think a RISC-based processor, especially for AI level stuff, I think that would be critical in the Intel strategy. I know they have the technology inside, and I'm sure they're working on stuff, but you never heard Pat Gelsinger mention it.
Yeah. And you say we're going to pay for it. Again, just playing devil's advocate here. So should we really be having Intel do this, or should we be propping up other companies that use ARM and stuff with CHIPS Act funding? I'm just throwing that out there as well. Because again, I still sometimes hear and worry that like the reason you'll see cuts to Intel and funding to other companies is they look around and they're like, wait, but you're not working on ARM. You don't seem to be catching up in AI. I mean, is there any concern that like in strengthening Intel, it's again, just pouring money into someone missed smartphones, tablet market, GPU, now AI. Like, are they also going to miss RISC-V? Like, why bet on them?
Right. Well, I'm mostly speaking about the manufacturing side.
Sure.
Right. I think the design side is the cow that they're just going to milk. Right. You and I should see the writing on the wall that market is not going to grow. Right. Because there's too many people dipping their fingers into it. And when Nvidia comes into the laptop business, you're going to see it, full frontal. Right now, it's mostly the cloud stuff, right? So there's cloud chips doing this, cloud chips doing that. There's not as many Intel chips doing the cloud stuff, but there's still Intel chips in there. Their data center business is, last I looked, it wasn't that good.
Yeah.
So they're already losing market share there. And now people are coming after the laptop business, or the client business, I guess you call it. And so, Intel design side, I mean, that's why it just cracks me up. People say, oh, you got to separate design and manufacturing. Well, what are you going to have left when you separate design? Are you going to have an Nvidia that's just going to, $1 trillion market cap? No, you're not going to have that. In fact, it's not going to grow. If anything, it's going to shrink. Because of the business, not because of the designs, because of the business climate, because everybody is able to do this now. So keep Intel together, keep the design and manufacturing integrated, put out some great chips. Yes, you're going to have to change architectures, or at least add new architectures, because other people are going to do it and they're going to stomp you. But to me, Intel is more about manufacturing than design. So that's the jewel in the crown. Unfortunately, that is where they're losing money, right?
Yeah.
How do you lose money on the design side, right? It's not that expensive to design chips. It's the manufacturing is the expensive part, but that's the crown jewel of Intel.
Yeah, so it seems like you think that the future, a good future for Intel, again, the cleaning of the house with management, getting things back on track, but then just really becoming a foundry company that, you said milking, that milks the designs they already have on their fabs with existing customers.
Yeah. Fill the fab with your own designs. Stop going to TSMC for crying out loud. That was a stopgap measure. If you're going to still allow that, it's going to kill your manufacturing. But fill your fab with your own designs, get other designs, and transition to a full-on foundry where you can make chips for all companies, but specifically for companies in the United States, to better protect, our infrastructure and our investment in technology.
All right. So I guess one last final thing I wanted to ask you about, though, was AMD graphics and Radeon. Where do you see their place in the market right now? It feels like they're getting some AI stuff, but not remotely as much as they would want to be. And tell me if I'm wrong about that. I know some people painted in a much rosier picture than I just did. And that, it looks like RDNA 4 is going to be very competitive on paper, at least. And UDNA, supposedly AMD is merging their high performance compute architecture with their gaming architecture again, like they used to do back in the day, which I think has made things very successful for Nvidia, because if your gaming graphics card sales go down, whatever, just make, RTX 6000 professional cards with the same dies. AMD seems like they're going to go in that direction, but I don't know. Do you see AMD reclaiming some market share in graphics anytime soon? Or I guess, would it be hard for you to believe they would? And how do you see them competing midterm with Nvidia and AI?
AMD's been on a roll, but I tell you, if I was offered a job at any company that competed with Nvidia, I would say no, honestly, because they're brilliant people. It's the best run company, and I wouldn't want to go up against them. I think the AMD graphics chips are actually very good. I think they're better than Intel's. But if you're going to move them to different applications like AI, I think it's going to be tough. But look at what AMD has done in the supercomputing. Every time I read about new supercomputers, it's always AMD. I mean, they've done a really, really good job. But I don't think moving into the space with Nvidia is going to be all that successful for them. They certainly should. They will get market share, but I wouldn't expect anything too big.
So yeah, you think it's possible for them to reclaim some lost market share with some good designs, but I mean, look, 15 years ago, I think they were 55% of the graphics market. You don't see them getting there for decades. I mean, something Black Swan would have had to have happened at Nvidia. Like, you could see them getting more market share against Nvidia, but you don't see them ever climbing to like a serious threat like they have been to Intel and CPU.
And look at their market share for Intel. AMD is still a pretty small company, right? I mean, they post some big numbers, but 20% growth on a smaller revenue number is a little bit it's impressive, but if you look at the big picture, they're still a pretty small company in comparison.
They're still
to
long ways from. I mean, people act like Intel's Nvidia. People act like Intel's an underdog now, and I guess maybe you could say they're starting to become, but they're still so much bigger than AMD. They're so much bigger, and AMD is far from a juggernaut, even though certainly people on Reddit seem to act like they are. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end the podcast then. I mean, I want to thank you so much again for coming on. As usual, please tell people where they can find you or anything else you want them to find.
Semiwiki.com. You can find me there. 7 days a week.
We'll have the link in the description as usual for that then as well. And of course, subscribe to Moore's Law Z on YouTube, like, share, comment below. I imagine there's going to be a lot of opinions from this discussion, but I think this is one of the best ones we've had, actually. So hopefully people learn from it as well. And, support Moore's Law Z on Patreon as well to be able to ask guest questions, get early access to podcasts and other exclusive content. Again, thanks for coming on, Daniel. Thank you to everybody for watching and for listening, and have a good week, everybody.
Great.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugada as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Z Jits, Daniel D, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, SNES Chalmers, Jem Ferreira, Toka, Valco Malev, Jensen Wang, Gregory S. Acker, Sarcastro, Chris Trick, Evan Dingle, Compressed AI Blocks, Hal Buma, Shredburb, Holden Mobley, Sammy Malas, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Jonathan, Chrysantine, Franco Frederic, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Nithra Zink, Mead and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Mads, Zoot Suit Taylor, Stephen Coates, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cakes, Gamers Unite, Amiable Chief, Mark Mitchell, Tommy, Jamie Witters, I Should, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Michelle Pell, Hexapuma, Mai Sharona, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Win Wang, Winstar, Corey Leonard, James I. Raider, Little Germany, JSMMH, Shay, Milton, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Dave Schultz, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Jansen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Slushbot, Him Sagung, Tails2299, Neil Val Verga, Sisyphos7771, The Forbidden Juice, Brian Wright, RB Racer, Alex Vega, Dr. J. Mad, Free D, Michael Cozy, John Swin, Crystal Joe, Elbergun, Jeffrey Jenneman, Kikum, Solarized 80, Matthew Marlowe, Brian P., Sprutnik, Hudat 42, Figup, Heguk, Cornster 671, Penta Winter, Hal Richard, Omega Doge, Angel of Cake, Mr. Tiger, John Wick, Boomskit, Curry King 3, Nixus Mania, Porcelain Oats, Sakosha, Armand, Vakatura, State Farm Snake, Rye Hill, Chi Bowles, Kevin Kunch, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.